So I'm really pleased to be here. It's been an exciting time. They're earning my keep here. I've been meeting with a lot of people so far. Some of you have come back for more, so thank you very much. What I want to do is kind of maybe give you a little background that I think is relevant to these two topics about where I've been professionally regarding outreach and engagement. It really started around 1999. At that time, I was director of continuing education at Virginia Tech and made a presentation in California about how I saw my job changing from one of doing programs to one of engaging with the external community. And if you define your job that way, that opens up a lot of other opportunities for what can the university do with a company or a community. That led this award that Alex mentioned. The association I was working with had this community practice I started on outreach and engagement because other people said, my job is changing too. And so from nothing, in a couple of years, this became the second largest community practice in the association. So it really, at that time, struck a responsive chord about people saying, you know, this makes a lot of sense to me. We need to be going in this direction. When I was chair of that particular group, since I was in economic development at that time, a lot of the programming that I put forth was economic development. And once again, from a topic that wasn't really talked about, we put programming together where, you know, the meeting rooms were just overflowing with attendees. People were saying, this is important to me from different aspects of the university, whether you're research or government relations or different stakeholders in the university, saying, this is an important part of what we need to be paying attention to. About that time, I said, you know, I don't know who does economic development in the state. And so I said to the government relations people, who are my counterparts in other universities in Virginia? And they said, we found one. And so I said, well, who else is involved? Because people were doing it, they just weren't calling it that. I remember Old Dominion University had a person from the vice president for research, vice president for finance, and the head of the real estate foundation. They were all kind of dipping their toe in this area, but it just reflects it was kind of an evolving discipline, and now many institutions like UB have a central access point, in this case, Office of Economic Engagement. It does reflect kind of how that has evolved over time. But with that group, we did start a statewide group of all those public universities, the 3 state-level economic development agencies, because we believed and they believed that higher education had a significant role and a potential for Virginia about taking advantage of its higher education assets to recruit companies to Virginia and to strengthen companies that are already there. So we saw a lot of connection between the universities and the economic development community. Later, in another professional association, I worked to help get going something called the Commission on Innovation, Competitiveness, and Economic Prosperity. That label is kind of economic development with innovation in there on steroids. And so that group was headed by Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State, and he was at that time heavily involved in the Council on Competitiveness. So they too saw higher education as an integral asset into our country's innovation and economic needs. I guess the last thing I mentioned is I helped start something called the Engagement Academy for University Leaders. It's a week-long program we do in Roanoke. We've done 4 or 5 of them so far over the last several years, which essentially is if you'd like to explore being an engaged institution, this is a place you can come to think about what does it look like, what's your strategy, what's your plan to kind of get from wherever you are to wherever you want to be. So that's kind of a little background about what links me to these 2 topics, which to me are really hooked together pretty tightly. All right, so what I'd like to do is give you a sense about what I think economic development is, where is it going in the country in a nationwide perspective, where is engagement, where is it going, what are some national trends. I have a couple of things that I think link the 2 topics together that for me are unfinished business, things we need to work on, and I'll close with a sense of some stories about Virginia Tech. Okay. Now, the people this morning said, now it's my turn to talk. And now I'm saying it's going to be your turn to talk. So, this is a question. Many of you are involved in different aspects of the university. Sometimes you label some of your work economic development. So what are you doing, what is UB doing when you say you're doing economic development? This is where I listen. Please.
Okay. For example, more immediate application of discoveries, or
It's a big thing with the feds.
And that, I think, is government's way of
Mhm.
driving more
Okay.
immediate
Good. All right. Others?
We make technical capabilities or technical expertise at the university originates available to industry.
Helping companies be more competitive. Okay. Others?
I started a spin-out company.
All right. I'm sure that was easy.
That's why I don't have any hands.
Any others? Please?
Set up from the University Communications Office, we've tried to put a coordinated, concerted effort on making the community aware of the myriad ways that it can connect the university around economic development.
Okay. Well, these are all good examples of different ways universities involved in economic development. And what I want to do is put it in the context of a model. This model was developed by the statewide group that I started. And let me begin on the right-hand side of the chart, some of the outcomes of an economic development activity. There aren't many. There's new jobs, there's better paying jobs, there's wealth creation, and there's improved quality of life. Those are the four things that can happen from an economic development effort. Now, the only ways you can get there is the next column. You can grow a business, start a business, or attract a business. And so the way you get to the end is pretty clear. Now, on the left-hand side of the equation is really where we're involved. What I'd like to do is go down the chart here about, it's a little fuzzy, isn't it? Go down the chart and go through some of these things, because you'll see yourself in some of these boxes. The first one is direct local impact. Universities are large employers. UB has thousands of employees that get paid. You buy staples in the community, you build buildings, you have people working on construction jobs. You're just a large entity. Universities never go away. They sometimes shrink a little, but they usually grow a little. They usually add a lot of capital, buildings. So they are very good, stable employers. Financing activities. Universities, frequently through their research foundation, are involved in startups, incubators, venture capital, helping people find capital to grow their enterprise. They provide infrastructure. They have specialized facilities, laboratories, research parks, and that's to the facilities piece. The fourth bucket, human capital creation. We don't very often use those words. Every April or May, when a student walks across the stage and flips the tassel, that person goes from what we call a student to an alum, and then they get a piece in the mail saying, would you like to contribute? But to the companies that are there, when they cross the stage, they go from student to employee. Now, they call that workforce development. Now, we in universities say we don't really get involved in workforce. That's what community colleges do. There's a big thing about, we don't do that kind of stuff. That's workforce development. And that's an integral part of economic development. At all levels of the academic food chain is an integral part of workforce and economic development. It also gets affected by your continuing education programs, seminars, workshops, other ways you transfer education instruction to an audience. Information transfer. Universities are fountains of data. Sometimes we have a lot and we can't get rid of it, know how to disseminate it, but we have a lot of stuff from all different kinds of sources. And we provide an access to that information for companies and other interested parties. Technology creation and transfer. We're known for the basic research. The applied research is also a very important effort. It's how we take that into the marketplace and commercialize it and result in wealth creation generally for the private sector. The last thing, collaboration. We are known for being excellent partners. We play well with others in the sandbox. And frequently they will come just because we call. They see us as neutral. They see us as pretty smart. We get along pretty well. We're pretty open in terms of how we work our styles. So we're good collaborators and partners. So it's these things that I think that represent a portfolio of economic development activities. So if the question is, what are you doing in economic development? I know UB's got stuff in every box. But when you tell your story, do you tell stories about every one of those boxes? I'm not sure. Okay, now some national trends in economic development. There's no question that our country needs innovation. We can only be successful in the marketplace if we can create products that are new and different, and you can't take them overseas to build or design or manufacture. So we have to have that critical component of innovation to be successful. People are finding out that universities are places where those things happen. They have smart people who produce ideas. We're idea factories. So those two things together come to a growing understanding on the part of the society out there about what universities can do in this new economy. But also what's happening is a growing expectation that we play more, that we do become more engaged. And so not only are they aware, but they expect more for us to deliver. Now, two other pieces about this expectation. Many times you will see in the paper a corporate member of your board of visitors, your advisory board, they have the perception that this fountain of knowledge, this fountain of research is rich and can generate bazillion dollars through IP licensing. It's not bazillions. At Virginia Tech, we do $3 million. I mentioned this morning, that's about half of a football game. And so to me, there's a big gap between the financial expectation out of licensing and what the reality is. It doesn't mean people are doing a bad job. That's not true. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it, because it's a way the faculty can disseminate their experience. But it's nowhere near what kind of the people on the outside think that the universities should be doing. And secondly, it's not only about the traditional places of engineering, medicine, and business. I mentioned to Alex last night, we had a dean of School of Education, who I convened on a monthly basis, he and some others, and he said, Ted, you know, I've been coming to these meetings for months. I don't know why you invite me. I said, Jerry, you've been at Virginia Tech for 35 years. You have probably had opportunities along your career to take a different fork and go somewhere else. Now, you didn't take that branch, but you had the opportunity. But when people do at least look down that other road, what they see, when they go over there with their spouse, they say, let's look at the schools, because they probably have kids. Now, if in some way they conclude that the schools are not very good, then the person going to look for a job will probably say, thanks, but no thanks. Oh, he says, I get it. Schools are really important for economic development. Absolutely. And so I'm just suggesting that this topic can happen probably in almost every discipline in the institution. It's been my experience at Virginia Tech that when I traveled around the state, there is untapped relationship capital. We'd have no idea how much is out there that we can harvest, that we can take advantage of. Not in a manipulative sense, we just have a long ways that we can go. People will come because we call, people will open the door because we come to talk to them. This is a huge, I think, missed opportunity for a lot of institutions to trade on their brand, and this is sometimes for alumni, but not always for alumni. They hold the university in a certain pedestal. I talk with Dr. So-and-so. Now, to us, it might be, you know, Susie or Johnny, but I talk to Dr. So-and-so. It's how they perceive the people that work in the university. The next thing we're seeing here at UB, this economic development has a central access point. That's happening more and more across the country. The next item about sustained economic development. You can have an initiative, you can engage people, and that's important. I think what we're beginning to see is for that to be sustained, there has to be scholarship in it. So how do we, in the engagement activity, work with faculty to encourage them to find scholarship in what they do? It doesn't suffice to do good work, even with a partner. Where's the scholarship so the faculty member can find a way in the existing reward system to be encouraged to continue to do that? And the last thing I'd mention is that regions win and non-regions don't. I'm sure Virginia is no different than it is here in New York, Western New York. Whether it's the Friday night football teams, I don't talk to them anymore because they beat us 30 years ago. Whatever the reason is, Your community is not unique. What do you have in common with those people down the road? Because the enemy is not them. The enemy is the people in California or in Singapore. And so when you reframe and think about who you're competing against, that sometimes can open people's minds about maybe we can find some common ground to kind of piggyback on your comment about the federal funding. Clearly, the federal agencies I work with are much more interested in having larger projects with a wider geographic footprint that engage a lot of partners and have a lot more impact on a community. So regions win. And now just one slide on what I see as some organizational changes that are happening around economic development. Now these are changes that are happening in titles of positions at these institutions. So for example, University of Connecticut is now searching for a Vice President for Economic Development. This spun out of the VPR's office. UNC Chapel Hill, they had a Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development. They've dropped the economic development words. They had a Office of Economic and Business Development, and they've eliminated that office. University of Virginia has an Associate Vice President in the Research Office and head of the Innovation, Partnerships, and Commercialization Unit. That's in addition to their Director of Economic Development, who reports as Assistant to the President. Washington State University has a Vice President for Economic Development and Extension. University of Georgia has an Associate Provost for Economic Development who's now also Assistant to the President and working on their incubator effort. So these are some changes that are happening. In general, the trend across the country, the stock is going up. This is a buy.
Can you just mention, do you know the reasons why UNC seems to go counter to the trend?
I think it has a lot to do with budget, but it's in the face of what I hear at the UNC system, which is an increased emphasis on this. So I don't know why this is. I do know that some people, the senior person left Chapel Hill, who was very effective in that role. It may be as simple as they have a new president with a different priority. All right, let's shift now to engagement. This is a term that got legs in the late 90s, 1999, with the Kellogg Commission's report, Returning to Our Roots, the Engaged Institution. And for them, the first question was, what is this engagement stuff? So their definition, you can see it up here. The main thing are the words systematically and productively involved with communities. And the key thing is this is not outreach. We're not going out there to do things for them. We're doing things with them. We're recognizing that we have some knowledge and they have some knowledge. There have been a lot of cases where institutions, maybe not UB, but people go into the community and I have the knowledge, I'm going to go out and help you. What we don't go into the experience with is a recognition that those people out there, have community wisdom. They know the power brokers. They know how things work. They know how things operate. They have systems, procedures, and relationships. And you need both those things to make the project work. And so what you see with the engagement word is this reciprocity, partnerships, duality. We both invest, we both get a return. And so this has a role in a relationship where we're in this boat together. Kellogg Commission also had some further definition. The first two are about students. The third one is really about putting knowledge to work. Work on real problems that communities have is the thrust behind the Kellogg Commission's work, and I hear a lot of that here in the conversations I've had so far. Now, one always raises the question, why are we doing this engagement stuff? And I asked that question this morning in some of the groups, and I think the answers are up here now, probably about the same thing I heard this morning. The people out there have needs. We have talent. In this transaction, sometimes we'll get money, sometimes we'll get opportunities for students, and the way that the research enterprise with the community affects or infects the faculty member's view of how he or she does his instruction and research missions. They have new relationship streams. This morning we talked about some of the development people were mentioning, we're about building relationships, and relationships hopefully in their case lead to gifts. So engagement is a way to nurture these relationship streams because people want to know what have you done for me lately before I give you my gift? Is that right? Okay. And last thing, a way that at least I look at how you can think about, have I arrived on this engagement journey, is do the people that you're calling on have you on their speed dial when they have a problem? Now, in general, I think the answer is no. Communities generally don't see the university as their provider of choice. But it's an aspirational outcome to look at. Now, you need to have a place to call, and you've got that here now with Marcia's OEE group. But in general, what is the tone, the tenor of how the external community views you in terms of being a provider of choice for various services? And now some national trends, kind of organizational changes here. Also, UNC Chapel Hill was listed earlier. I mentioned eliminated their vice chancellor for, dropped the title of economic development, eliminated their Office of Business and Economic Development. Virginia Tech has just added an assistant vice president for engagement who reports to the vice president for outreach and international affairs. NC State eliminated their vice chancellor for engagement, extension, and economic development. Purdue, which is a big surprise to me, Purdue I view as the institution that's led the country in the engagement conversation. Their former president, Martin Jischke, was, I think, co-chair of the Kellogg Commission. He kind of wrote the book on engagement. They've eliminated that position, created an associate vice president for engagement, and now reports to their vice president for public affairs. Now, is this the kind of the ebb and flow of organizational life in institutions? It could be. They have a different president than was there before. She didn't come from a land grant. She came from California. It may just be a different priority. My sense is that Purdue, this might come back because it's so baked into the fabric of how Purdue works. Now, overall, organizational changes, you see the stock going down. In terms of titles, vice president for engagement, kinds of things. However, for me anyway, I think the titles are a little misleading. The function itself, I think, is really taking root. Whether it's at UB, where engagement is one of the 3 E's, whether it's what community colleges do in their community, whether it's urban institutions working with the community immediately around the institution, I think engagement is really taking root, and the attendance at our Engagement Academy in the last 4 years really reflects that very strong attention. All right, now, unfinished business. It seems to me that we as institutions are pretty good about doing things out there, whether it's for them or with them, but we're not so pretty good about encouraging faculty to find scholarship in that activity. It absolutely it's incumbent upon us to work with faculty to encourage them to take it the extra mile and find scholarship in their work. If it won't, it just won't be sustainable unless there's a major change in most reward systems, and that just takes a while. The other area is impact assessment. How do we know that we're doing well? In continuing education, people say, well, how are you doing? I say, well, we made this much money, this many people come, I sold this many hotel rooms, and I went down the list of those kind of metrics. But at the end of the day, I didn't know how we were doing. Because I didn't know when that person in the seminar went home and what he or she did or didn't do based on what they heard. What difference did that thing make in their life? And so this kind of work is really tough. It's very labor intensive. It's very expensive. But we absolutely must do some of this. Pick a few cases, drill down, find out what differences it make, because then we can tell stories. It's not a story for me to say that I had 40,000 people come to these programs. It's a big story to talk about how it changed somebody's life or how to improve the performance of a company. All right, let me shift over now to Virginia Tech. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how we're organized, give you some examples where the university has demonstrated some thought leadership at the state level, how my office works with individual companies and communities, and how we work with some partners and some stories there. Organization. I was head of the Office of Economic Development, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We also had something called an Economic Development Leadership Team. This was a group of about 12 to 15 vice presidents, deans, associate vice president for public relations, head of the research park, the head of the IP organization, in general, people who were externally focused in working with companies and communities. Now, initially, we brought them together to talk about what are the priorities for economic development for the university. But what we found out was happening is that we did some of that, but the main thing we accomplished was we had a networking function. This kept the economic development agenda very high on people's minds throughout the year. We met monthly. These are senior people. Attendance was very strong. If a dean couldn't come, he or she always sent their number 2 person. So this turned out to be very important to them, and the way we played it out was we invited speakers to come in. And we'd tell the speaker, these are external people, tell us about your organization. What do you do now with Virginia Tech, and what could you do with Virginia Tech? And so out of that helped us think about how could we engage with that external entity on an economic transaction. Some of the people that are on this list, you might say, well, why is that person there? Why is the chief information officer on this economic development effort? Turns out he was the person who led a $50 to $100 million broadband implementation in a part of Virginia that was absolutely economically destroyed. Low educational level, low education achievement, no jobs, high unemployment, and they thought that broadband would be a way for them to kind of climb out of the morass. Now some stories about thought leadership. When Mark Warner was governor of Virginia, now Senator Warner, I met monthly with his Secretary of Commerce and Trade. Mike Schul believed that higher education had a significant role in this new innovation economy. And so he was very supportive of our getting together. We helped change the conversation in Virginia about manufacturing, supporting it. Tremendous ally, and really helped us build further bridges to the economic development community. IALR is the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research. This is an entity in Danville, Virginia. Danville is on the southern border of Virginia, with right on the North Carolina border. Heavy textile, tobacco, furniture. It's a bad place to go to economically. And the community decided we'd like to have a research engine of some kind here to help us turn around our economy. Contacted Virginia Tech. We opened a research facility. There are 4 tenure track mechanical engineering faculty members there doing research. Some of it's related to motorsports. There's a major racetrack nearby. And so that's an anchor for that kind of community where we're trying to raise the average level of education for the people who live there. But that model of doing research out there, to the researchers, when they could get this money, the earmarked money, the choice was, will you do the research there in the community, or will you not get it at all? There was not the choice, could you do the research in Blacksburg? And so it's a way to drive the faculty members to the community, and so these 4 people live full-time in that community doing their research program to help stimulate the economy. But that concept of distributed research then led to 2 regional R&D centers, one in Lynchburg with the nuclear sector and one in Hopewell, which is near Richmond, with the chemical industry. That further led to the Tobacco Commission, which in Virginia is a major investor in the tobacco region. They created 5 energy R&D centers. Each were funded about $8 million for facilities, and there's another $100 million R&D fund. The next category, VT Surge, Virginia Tech has recently opened a new facility in Ballston, Virginia. That's right down the street from the National Science Foundation. Part of it was to bring together a lot of our Northern Virginia operations under one roof, but part of it, and the VT Surge, was to work with the local technology business community, the leadership of the technology community, to say, what do you need from your favorite technical university to work in Northern Virginia? The business community was extremely supportive of this idea. They wanted Virginia Tech to have a big name on the side of the building you can see from I-66 as you drive by. So that's been a tremendous story. The last example I mentioned, we have these faculty in Danville working with this racetrack. We've now worked in a partnership with General Motors. They've invested $5 million for this National Tire Research Center. So General Motors will require its tire suppliers to have their tires tested at this research facility in Danville. And so there will be job creation, capital investment, the usual kind of metrics for economic activity. And now my office that I was in charge of, the main word here is to link. link the assets of the university to the external community. Probably very similar to what the connecting function that OEE has here at UB. What is that office? The office is built on the research engine of the university, just like it is here. There are 5 professional staff, and 1 support person, and a number of graduate students, some paid, undergraduate students, some unpaid, depending on our project load. When I took over, we frequently had, we were funded by a lot of small projects, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, where we work with the individual community, and over time, I felt I'd like to have a bigger impact on our invested unit of time, and so we've migrated significantly to much larger projects, more partners, bigger geographic footprint, and more money. So you hear some more about that in a little bit. And all told, that's meant about $10 million in external grants and contracts in the last 2 or 3 years, and I'll show you some of those things in a minute here. We also work with individual companies and communities, probably much like you do here. Bath County is the home of the Homestead, the major resort in Virginia. They wanted a tourism plan. They have like 2/3 of the people that work there are in tourism. Brunswick County is in rural southern Virginia. It's a heavy wood forestry area. They wanted a wood-based incubator, and we did a feasibility study. General Dynamics was on campus last week for a day. Much like you do, I showcased them to a number of faculty and that I thought would line up with their core technologies and where they were having issues and problems. Elba Systems is an Israeli IT company that had the same kind of interest. Economic developers, we host them all the time. They have a prospect coming to their community, either at the local or state level, or they have an existing company that has some issues or would like to help with Virginia. I view the economic developers as really a sales force for my economic development organization. So they're out there kind of feeling around, and they know who to call when they have a question. A major thread in our engagement effort is working with partners. Rolls-Royce, the jet engine manufacturer, not the car company, looked at establishing a new manufacturing facility in the States as part of the competition, because this is a very attractive business to come, $500 million capital investment, 500 jobs. What they wanted in the proposal they accepted from Virginia was, what can you offer in terms of workforce development and in terms of human capital? And so the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, which is the Empire State Development for Virginia, put together the University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and the community college system, put together a proposal that resulted in this company opening this facility near Richmond, Virginia. In terms of what it meant to the institutions, Virginia Tech has 3 named professorships. University of Virginia has 3 in their School of Engineering and 3 in their School of Business. There are 2 major research centers, one on propulsion systems related to their business, and that's for Rolls-Royce, and the other is the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing, which is really to kind of help manufacturing across Virginia. So there's a lot of positive spin, and this is a way that the state of Virginia decided to invest to attract this company. It's different than giving tax abatement, different than giving land, rail access, some of the usual ways that economic developers use to attract companies. They chose to do it by investing in higher education. I mentioned earlier the 5 energy R&D centers. That's in 4 regions of the more distressed parts of Virginia. I had an EDA grant that focused on commercializing research into some of the more distressed parts of Virginia. And we had a group of composites companies in Southwest Virginia that I brought together in terms of a cluster, and now we've created an interest group so they can come together and explore what they can do together and what they can do with the university. So it's a new way to entertain working with these companies. I mentioned these partnerships. I just have 3 projects here. The first one is called Green Jobs. It was $3.8 million. We had 20 partners, 3 community colleges, 20 counties. And this is how do you train people to work in energy-friendly construction? How do they do energy audits? So it's a training thing. Community colleges got most of this money. Whoops. The next one, Health IT. We work with community colleges again about there are 5 health areas and what are the training they need for the medical records and health IT. So here this is $4.7 million, 29 counties and 5 community colleges. Again, the community colleges got most of this money. And the last one, the transportation equipment manufacturers, we have a company there, Volvo, which makes the only manufacturer of heavy trucks in the U.S. And so what are the companies that supply the heavy truck industry? We had about $1.5 million there with 19 counties. And again, this money kind of flowed through Virginia Tech. Some of their money, some of our money worked to hire faculty to do technical assistance on making companies more competitive, not unlike probably what TCIE does here.
Are those grant dollars or what kind of?
This is the amount of the grant from the feds. So let me just wrap up with some key points here that I would like to summarize my thoughts. There's no question that those people out there that look at us, their expectations for what we can do for them are going up significantly. Actually, there's an issue about how we manage that. Companies and communities want what we have to offer because we're idea factories, and they have come to learn and appreciate that places around the country that have universities are much more successful economically than those that don't. So sometimes the question becomes, how can you put a university in every town and hamlet in the country? Well, that's a little hard to do. So how can you have UB be out there but still be resident here? That's kind of what we talked about with distributed research. The message when I work with the community is I'll bring the people, you bring the money. I don't do free stuff. And so what I will work with the community on, let's unite together, triangulate, and try to find a third-party funder for the project that we both want to do together. But I don't do things that generally don't have money with it. I mentioned about engaged scholarship, about the scholarship being, I think, just central to having a sustained effort in this area. And finally, regions win. That's real clear from the recent funding that we received from the feds about some of these workforce and economic development areas where there's a much larger footprint, much more impact, and a much greater return to the university on our invested time and talent. So that's kind of my story about what I've learned in economic development and engagement, and some things about what we've done at Virginia Tech. So thank you. And